All right. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to class 3. I'm Brad Nine, the consulting strategist at FRSecure. We will be covering domain 7. And yeah, let's get going. Just a reminder, online, be respectful. We're not offensive, obscene, anything. Please, politics, no religion, no politics. And if there is an issue, you may be disabled, blocked. And reminder also, don't copy or share copies of copyrighted materials. That does, in fact, violate the code of conduct. So you would be ineligible. All right. Of course, we got to have a dad joke because why not? What do you call a boomerang that won't come back? A stick. Okay. So agenda today, just go through some quick welcome, reminders, introduction. We'll go through some test questions, some sample questions, and then we will cover domain 7, communication and network security. 15 sections, so this is good. We'll make this, I think there's enough to keep us busy, but not too bad. Reminder, when you're studying, it's easier, just do it in small amounts. Don't overwhelm yourself till you get closer to the test. Flashcards, practice test apps help. For me, writing things down really helps. Use Discord, not Slack. My bad. And get some fresh air, get some exercise. That really does help. So stick with it. You'll be glad you do. We'll go through some test questions towards the end and go through that. One thing that I do want to mention is we've gotten a lot of comments that, there's a new version coming out. What's this going to change? Unfortunately, we don't really have a whole lot beyond some of the general high level. But what ISC² says is that this is more of a knowledge-based, like real-world experience. And so if you have the experience and you feel comfortable with the content, the changes shouldn't be too drastic. Personally, I had been studying with the previous version. They changed the content a couple of months before I took my exam, and I didn't really change anything and passed. So the content itself really has not had significant changes. And so if you're very comfortable with the concepts, that's going to be the most important part. All right, let's do some questions. Which of the following are mandatory? Oh, well, that did not work how it should have, but it is procedures. Sorry about that. That clicked way too fast. I don't know what happened on that one. Guidelines. They're guidelines. They're what, hey, here's some good ideas. Baselines are that they're the configuration. Best practice is similar to a guideline. So procedures are mandatory within a program. Okay. What is the most important thing to consider when developing a business continuity plan? Now, within the exam, they'll probably spell these out, but it's always important to know the different acronyms because they may not. So, one thing we're going to look at right away is to say, well, are there any that we can eliminate? And in this case, I would say it's safe to eliminate B pretty quickly, although that is probably something that you're thinking if you're exercising your business continuity plan. But this is about as close to a slam dunk as a question as you're going to get. People are always going to be the top priority when looking at business continuity, disaster recovery, anything like that. It is always people. All right, what's the definition of a threat? It is a weakness or gap in the system that may be exploited, a negative event leading to a negative outcome, anything of value, or a set of guidelines and processes created to help organizations in a data breach scenario. So just needing to know definitions. What is a threat? It is a negative event leading to a negative outcome. All right. Which of the following best represents a preventative control? Now, this is an interesting one because we're talking best represents, and within the exam, it will be the best answer. There may be multiple correct answers for a question. So we need to know which is the best. So an IDS, well, that says right there is detection. That's not preventative. So we know it's not that one. Internal audit, well, we know that's, again, that's a detective control. That's not a preventative control. Cameras or a firewall. Cameras could be preventative, but they could be detective. And firewall is going to be preventative. So in this case, the best answer would be a firewall. All right. What should a risk management program be, I should say? Zachman framework, consistent, measurable, standardized, comprehensive, modular, consistent, measurable, standardized, comprehensive, and flexible, or integrating security and privacy into the SDLC. Well, again, we want to know what these things are. Can we eliminate anything? Well, SDLC is not the only part of a risk management program, so I'm going to eliminate D. Zachman framework, no. So is it going to be B or C? Well, it should be B. Modular is the big key there. We want to be able to, make changes only where necessary. So there's some questions for us. Now, let's get into the meat of it. We got a lot to cover today. Here are the different areas. There are 15 different domain or sections under domain 7. So I'm not going to read through all these because we are going to go through all of them, but hope everyone is ready. But of course, what would we be doing if we didn't do a dad joke first? Why do you never see elephants hiding in trees? Because they're so good at it. All right. Now, looking at this introduction to SecOps, security ops, it's the day-to-day operations and maintenance of the information security program. Again, remember, you're going to see things in orange. These are really important to know. These are what are going to be your keys to know how to study and what to look for. So thinking security operations, this could be SecOps, like I said. Think if the information security is risk management, this is the continual piece of it. And really operate, like it says, you're going to want to operationalize these. And we'll get into a little bit more. I'm not going to read off of these slides. Don't worry. Just once we get into the content, it'll be a little bit easier to give some tips, tricks, things to think about. So what are we going to cover? Now, again, it's very important. We're not expecting you to be a digital forensic incident response person, but you have to know the basics because there is going to be some level of that. And maybe that is where you end up going. But it is really important to understand how you handle evidence, how do you collect it, the reporting documentation requirements, the different investigative techniques, and then some of the tools, tactics, procedures, and artifacts. So we need to understand how these things need to be done, because even if we're not a DFAR expert, you're likely in security going to come across some level of this that you're going to have to follow. All right. So evidence, it's supporting something. Okay. So with that, it's either I'm going to say that, Joe Blow did something. The evidence would then support that assertion. We'll talk about there's different types of evidence. The better the evidence, the better the support. So there is a tiered system for evidence, which you can see right there, the 4 types right below. So real, demonstrative, documentary, and testimonial. And we'll go through what do those mean. And critical that you understand the difference and be able to identify the difference within the exam. So what is real evidence? This is physical. Think physical, right? So the fingerprints, the blood, DNA, knife, gun, those types of things. These are typically admissible to court because it is it's going to prove or disprove a fact, right? If my DNA is on a knife, or my fingerprint is on the knife with the DNA or blood of a victim, that's pretty tough to overcome. But you, again, when you do real evidence, like it says there, it must be relevant to what it's supporting. It must be material and authentic, and there must be chain of custody. Okay, so we'll go through what a chain of custody looks like as well. But again, real evidence, think physical, and then remember that it's got to be relevant, material, and authentic. Demonstrative, again, so again, like it says, charts and diagrams. It is admissible, but think about like maps and diagrams. Like I said, maps and diagrams of the crime scene. Okay, this is how we found things. This is where we found these things, and it's used to try to create that evidence to say this is why we're saying what happened. This map and this diagram, here's where we found this real evidence, and how does that apply to the crime that happened. So again, real evidence, physical, demonstrative, charts and diagrams. That's really where it is. We're demonstrating or illustrating, like it says, testimony. I'm on the stand. I walked in and I saw this, and this in these locations. To a jury, that may not help, right? Because they don't know the layout of the room or the building. So by having a diagram or a map that shows I found A at location 1, B at location 2, C at location 3, then they can see exactly what that looks like. It makes a lot more sense to them. And obviously opposing counsel is going to could use that evidence to say the opposite. Documentary evidence. So it's documentation. I mean, certain allegations at trial. So, I mean, any sort of documentation you could think of could fall into this. But you need to know there are restrictions. It has to be, they have to be authentic documents. It has to be from a trustworthy source. So you can't just throw any document in there, but any document theoretically could become evidence if it is authentic, trustworthy, and relevant to the case. But pretty self-explanatory to me. All right, testimonial. Again, that's exactly what it sounds like. It's a testimony. Testimony under oath about what the facts of the case are. Again, now this could go back with having demonstrative evidence as well. Those two things can go hand in hand, but you will need to know those 4 types of evidence at trial and understand the importance of where they would come into play. All right, so now let's get back to a little bit less legal and more cybersecurity, information security. Collecting the digital evidence. Integrity is the most important thing. Without question, if there is not a full chain of custody, if you don't document, I did this at this date. I mean, when I did copies of devices, I would take pictures of the device when it arrived in the box, open the box, show the status of it, show that it was, the hard drive was still in, the screws were in, undo the screws, show the picture, take the next picture showing that hard drive still attached with serial number, take it out, show the combo doc, and then all the other things. So, when we're doing incident response, collecting digital evidence, there's more work that goes into documentation than the actual investigation with collection when you're doing these collectings. So date, time, anything that any action you took, any observations that may be relevant, tape on the box was looked to be, have a second seal on that or whatever. Never tamper with the original, never do anything with the original. What you'll want to do, and this is a combo doc, this is a write blocker, and use a specific technology that would prevent you from writing from the original evidence. And so I always would take a picture showing the configuration that the write block was, the original was on the write block side and it was going to a second drive. Really, really, really important. I cannot emphasize that enough. So integrity. This is unbelievable because if you don't maintain a chain of custody, then the evidence could be thrown out, no matter how solid the actual evidence is. If you cannot account for every second that you had, that you encountered the evidence till you no longer have it, critical. The ISO standard there, 27037, it is really interesting if you want to read it. But basically what we do is we're going to track incident. If there's a number, date and time, who it came to, who it went to, typically and then you have those people sign it. And from the time you sign your name in this to the time the next person signs off on it, it is your responsibility to be able to say it was in this location and this is what happened with it. So super important. You can imagine, right? If there was a criminal trial and evidence goes missing or nobody knows what happened to it, or you can't prove where it was, it could be critical to a case. Another good resource there is NIST 886, if you're interested in that. Okay. Again, talking about this, like I said, you have to document it. It literally would be in some form. It doesn't matter. It could be a spreadsheet. It could be a Word document. It could be, there's software obviously for doing this type of thing, but everything you do needs to be documented. You don't want to be subjective in any way. You don't want to be making judgment. You want to be as objective as possible. I found this at this point. Then this was identified. Then, right. So we want to make sure that you're just telling the narrative of what was found, not your interpretation of it. So let's just say this traffic was found at this point on this device from A to B. Leave it at that. Don't add, which is indicative of. Well, that's not relevant to that evidence. What you want is, when you're doing that, is just what you actually can see. You don't want to be making assumptions or leaps when doing those types of things. Okay, so now really this is the big one. I want you guys to really, really know this. And these are, you're going to need to know the difference between the things on this page when we're looking at admissibility of evidence. You'll need to know that it needs to have all of these things, right? So accurate, that makes sense. It can't have errors. The authenticity, so nobody can dispute where it's from. Comprehensive, again, we just talked about the documentation side of it. You need to know and say, this happened here, this happened here, this happened here. And so you want to paint that picture. That's why we spend, maybe twice as long writing and documenting as you do actual investigative work. Looked at this folder, found nothing. Looked at this folder, found nothing. Looked at this folder, found XYZ. Within XYZ, found whatever, right? So you want to make sure that you can say and show that it was a very comprehensive investigation. And then by doing that, it typically leads to convincing, so that any conclusions are very certain. You're not leaving it up for interpretation. Again, objective, it's what does the evidence say, not what you say. So it doesn't matter what your opinion is, it's what do the facts actually say. And this is for, again, reporting and documentation. Now, testimonial could be considered different, but when we're doing reports and documenting these things, this is what is critical to know and complete. And then admissible is for the court to decide. So you can do the best you can, but if the court decides that it's not authentic or it's not accurate or it's not objective, they could say it's not admissible. So it no longer will be accepted by court. So you need to know, again, these 6 things, what to get to be admissible, I guess, is it accurate, authentic, comprehensive, convincing, and objective? Very, very important. When you're doing these things, these investigations, always work with legal counsel. Especially if you're new and you haven't done this before, work with someone. Don't trying to do this on your own without having any experience is likely not the best idea. Here is just a definition of admissible evidence. So evidence presented before the trier of fact. So it could be the trier of fact is right, the judge or jury trial for them to consider in deciding the case. The rules of evidence, again, like it says, we just talked about, it has to be relevant. It can't be, like you said, or like it says there, prejudicial, confusing, right? So going back, it's got to be objective. We don't want a bunch of opinion in there because that's typically where you start running into those problems of admissibility. We talked a little bit there about hearsay. It's important to know, typically hearsay is not admissible. And hearsay would be things like, let's see, I heard somebody else say something. There are exceptions to that, but knowing these rules, it's good to, again, I don't remember seeing any of these rules explicitly in there, but it's good to know, again, what makes evidence admissible in court. And we talked about it, like I said, it's accurate, it's authentic, comprehensive, convincing, objective. That is what we want. So there are some examples for hearsay, which would be, maybe third party, but again, I think the big thing to know there is that it's Rule 802 is the rule against hearsay. And we know that it is not admissible unless there are specific statutes, Rule 802 states it, or rules from the Supreme Court. You don't necessarily need to go a whole lot deeper than that. If you're interested, absolutely feel free to read it. But again, remember this exam is mile wide, inch deep. Okay, investigative techniques. We need to know 4 different types. And you'll, again, need to know the difference between these 4. So data capture, pretty straightforward. Are we manually capturing it, automatic? It could be either way, right? You could have network capture in place. We could be manually taking an image, but you're capturing data. Interviewing with it'd be a witness or first person conversation, right? We're going to interview somebody, talk to them about what they saw, what did they see or hear. Interrogation, very different. Interrogation is, again, I guess it's law enforcement, and there are very specific rules around how that is. So in the exam, you might see an interview and an interrogation as an answer. Interview is just going to be an interview, is going to be talking with a witness to an incident. And interrogation is almost always going to be done by law enforcement, and there are specific rules around how they can be conducted. And then you have external requests, which would then be typically your warrants or subpoenas. Always really important. Let the evidence draw conclusions. We never want to make assumptions when doing an investigation. That's when you get into trouble. You miss things. You have confirmation bias, right? So when we're looking at this, strictly look at the evidence and let it dictate where the investigation goes and what the conclusion is. If you're not sure, go to an expert and work with them. All right, so now how do we, okay, complying with investigations, looking at some tools, tactics, procedures. Good ones, if you're doing this on a regular basis, you're going to have a full set. Our incident response team has a full set of tools. If you're not doing it, there's really not a whole lot of reason to do this, but it is good to do. Okay, so talked about this a little bit. Right blockers, you're going to need to know, and again, a lot of this is going to be what are they used for, and how do I identify that what the question is asking. So it could say this tool is designed to allow, again, and I know I'm reading, but bear with me. What tool is designed to allow examinations or imaging of a storage device without writing any data to the storage device? Okay, well, that's a right blocker. A drive imager, not necessarily going to be the same thing. So right blocker is definitely going to be the one that will prevent writing of any data. The drive imager should. That's typically a software, and I would use that in combination with a right blocker, just because you don't want anybody being able to question any of your evidence. And so we talked about that. You can see, you get a picture, of it set up. You can see that it is in fact in right block mode, and you can see the green light there. If you look on the other picture a little bit bigger, you can see that it's got the little line that it cannot write to that attached device. So getting evidence of that is really important. Faraday cages or containers. Here's what you need. What do you need to know? Blocking from electromagnetic interference. Right. So typically, people need to throw, going into secure locations, you have to put your phones into a Faraday. It will prevent it from being any electromagnetic interference. You can see there's big ones. You can have room size ones. You can have bags, all kinds of different things. But important thing, Faraday container, protecting against electromagnetic interference. That's your key right there. Video audio recording. So, you can hear it and say, video doesn't lie, but it is true. That is obviously very compelling if there is video and audio, but you have to, again, prove that it's authentic, it hasn't been manipulated. Definitely can save time in an investigation if there's video and you can actually see what happened. But rule of thumb is physically secure the crime scene, always physically secure it, then go back and use your video or audio as a detective control. And you'll hear that throughout. That's important because you've got preventative and detective and administrative controls, and those are all coming up. So you're going to start hearing as we go through these classes, these things start to click and relate and go, oh, wait, I heard that before. So pay attention to what we're saying. We're not trying to just read. These really are, as instructors, trying to give you those things that are going to make your life easier when you're studying and when you are taking the exam. Okay, so more digital forensic tools. So what you'll probably want to know more so than any specific tools, because IC squared is pretty agnostic in that manner, is the different types of tools and how to tell the difference and what tool would be appropriate for a given scenario. In this case, network traffic, think Wireshark. So, but really it's network analysis. What traffic went where, from who, what was involved. Those are the important things there. Log analysis, so a SIM or log aggregator. Again, log analysis is to reconstruct events across systems. And, we've talked about this, why this is so important. If you're in a digital forensics or an incident response, it's a lot easier to look at a centralized location and see things that happened and correlate than try to do that across 25, 50, 1,000 different machines or data points. If within a SIEM, you can look and see the traffic and watch and follow trails or watch executable activity and track those things. So log analysis, think SIM, log aggregation is to reconstruct those events. Data recovery, it's file recovery for deleted or overwritten pieces of data. Fairly straightforward. A lot of this is, if you just read through it a little bit and go through it, it does. This is one of the easier ones for people, I think, to get. Definitely not why I volunteered for this domain. It was virtual machines. I think everybody is very familiar with virtual machines at this point. From a digital forensics perspective, think about it for rebuilding an isolated environment. I want to have a virtual machine that is isolated, has no network, no way to write outside of its drive to execute malware to see what it's doing. Code analysis. So this is going to be decompilers, reverse engineering software. Hashing is going to be integrity verification. So hashing a file or a hard drive gives it a unique code. And that is how you can show I did a hash of the initial drive on the write block. Here's that hash. Here's a hash of the image that I came up with. And if they match, that verifies the integrity of your image so that it cannot be questioned that things were changed. And then toolkits are going to be suites of software for forensic investigations. In this case, you could have InCase, it's a great tool. FTK Forensic Toolkit or FTK. So FTK Imager is probably one of the more widely used, and then you would use one of those physical write blockers and then use FTK to actually image the device. So you don't need to know these for the exam, but really important to if you want to get into digital forensics or you're if they considering it, these are the kind of the big ones out there. There's obviously a lot more. So now looking at techniques and procedures, digital forensics is a specialized skill. It's not something that everybody can or should do. It is a very technical skill, but it also, again, requires a ton of documentation and following procedures. So when you set up and are working on in an incident response team, for any type of incident, there needs to be a run book with steps that are followed. And so we need to know what those are ahead of time so that going back to authenticity and comprehensiveness of those investigations, we can prove that we're good, and we followed the steps, we were comprehensive, and the evidence was authentic. So typically this is going to be part of the IR plan or an appendix or supplement to your IR plan. There are, again, a ton of standards for that. SANS out there, there's the SANS posters and ISO standards, but really important to do that. FRSecure has a bunch of playbooks on our website for free for incident response that will get you started. Obviously, they are not going to be as comprehensive as you're going to need for your exact environment, but it's going to cover all the basics. Then you'll need to customize them to meet the actual environment and tools and things that you have in place. Again, here are those SANS posters. There's just this SANS DFARS cheat sheet. The CISSP cheat sheet is great. This memory forensics, if you're getting into this, the SANS posters are awesome. Some more, we've got the SANS, the NIST computer forensics school testing program. What does that look like? This is for ensure reliability of computer forensics tools. So again, if you're really interested, this is likely not going to be on the exam, but it's good to know what these things are out there, so that if this is an area you want to go down, education and reading and learning and just doing these things really is going to be good. From an exam perspective, you're going to need to know the high level. How do I tell the difference in the different types of evidence, the different collection methods, and then these are the generic procedure steps in the book. You will want to know and be able to prioritize these properly. You need to know the order that these are in. And so with this, when we're doing an incident, we define our priorities. Okay, what is our typically looking at, what is what's affected, right? Is it all workstations? Is it workstations and servers? Okay, so if it's workstations and servers, then probably I need to prioritize my servers because that's where our data is at. Do we know the ingress point, right? So identifying and defining your priorities, identifying those data sources, how are we going to collect our data, and how are we going to execute that plan to collect the data? The documentation and preservation of how do we document and preserve the integrity of that data? We're going to then look for hidden and erased data, and then we perform our analysis. So, like that box says, I mean, the reality is, as you're doing these steps, you're always analyzing these things. You're always watching for things. Just because that's just the true nature of it. But for the test, know the steps. And then again, do not make assumptions. And that's a learned skill. I would be clear on that. It's really easy to go, oh, I've seen this before, and jump to something. Well, you might have seen that 6 months ago or 3 months ago, and attackers have now changed their tactics and procedures. Now you've missed something because you made an assumption. So make sure you can memorize and know how to put, if we're looking at forensic procedures, those techniques, this is the order that they need to be in. Cloud security, cloud specific, the cloud security alliance is right there in front of me. It's just mapping this to the cloud computing. It's just, again, from a test, this is good to know if you're doing cloud investigations. From a test perspective, we want to make sure you understand this, because the reality is it's going to be the same priority order. It's just how do you do those things? It's going to be different cloud versus an on-prem. So don't get too deep in the weeds on some of this stuff. Okay, so artifacts. We will need to know the definition of artifacts. that this Lockhardt's principle, just kind of interesting to know. That every contact by a criminal leaves behind a trace. Just interesting. We're going to be looking for that every contact. There's going to be an artifact that's that contact. So everything they do leaves behind a trace. It's a matter of finding those pieces. Core things. Know these, and you need to know what you see at this level for these OSs. So for computers, we need to know Windows logs are event viewer logs. Know the event viewer log system, security, those types of things. That I need to be looking in recycle bin. I need to look in the registry. Those are typically the kind of the level that they're going to be looking for to be able to say what device would have registry, or what it may be a long question, and they say you find this evidence in the registry. What OS is it? Well, we know that Windows is the one with a registry, or Trash Time Machine, plist files. That's Apple and Mac OSs. Be careful with the logs, because there are logs in all three of Linux, Windows, and Apple. So maybe it says the system event log. Oh, okay, that's your trigger for Windows, or the console log for Apple, or you find the log files under var. Well, now I know that is a Linux OS. So you don't need to know necessarily the specifics from a investigative standpoint. And we're going to go through these with other stuff as well, and there will be more specific for OSs, but when we're looking at investigations, these are the artifacts. This is how you tell for the exam what they are looking for. Okay, so more things to write down. We need to know if they say you find in the cache or in the cookies. Well, that's a browser artifact. File remnants, deleted file copy, that's local storage. And then cloud storage, very similar to local, but you may see a request was made for deleted files. Well, that would be your trigger to say, oh, that's cloud storage instead of local storage. You need to know net flows. Well, that is going to be all IP traffic as it enters and exits an interface. So everything that's coming and going out of that traffic, a packet capture goes to the actual details of the data itself. If there's known bad traffic or a block list, so this could be C2 command and controls traffic. This could be, blocklisted sites. Like it says, this IOC, indicator of compromise. If you see traffic going to known command and control, that's a pretty good indicator that there is malicious activity on your network. And then you'll need to know network device log files. So that's going to be routers and switches, the actual device log files. All right, so this is what packet capture is going to look like. This is in Wireshark, as you can see, and you can see, source IP destination, what happened. So in this case, 10.0.101 said get this from 74.125, 74.125.226 said, oh, okay, here it is. Now going back and saying, okay, I want to get this, and now it's okay. So you can see the conversation and see what's happening between, for in this case, HTTP traffic in this specific time frame of the packet capture. Okay, we need to know mobile device artifacts. Typically for this, at this point, you really only see iOS and Android. I don't know if I've seen anything but that in a long time, but I guess in theory you could, but for the most part, focus on the big things. So one thing that really makes this difficult is, all mobile devices that are relatively recent are coming with encryption by default. So it's you have to get a lot of times, subpoena to have, if a user is or someone's not willing to unlock their device for you to make a copy and get data, then you kind of have to try and force them through the court system. So very difficult to get copies of devices, contrary to unless you're law, I'm sure the law enforcement and government, but for the most part, for typical users, it's very difficult. When you're looking at mobile device, make sure if you see cellular, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, or NFC, that's going to be talking mobile devices, and those are all very unique skill sets. Typically, additional training, and then understand that Apple's Find My Device or Google's Find My Device allows a lost or stolen phone to be locked or wiped, which could destroy evidence. So if you are investigating something and you seize it and the user suspects it, they could, in theory, remote lock or wipe their device before you're able to get approval to unlock it. Again, typically more of a law enforcement scenario, but could happen. Okay. Obviously, we can't prevent all bad things from happening. You must be able to detect and respond. So what does that mean? Well, I'm glad you asked. Okay. Intrusion detection and prevention. Very, very important to know the difference here. Detection is passive. It's going to detect and hopefully alert. And prevention is active. It's going to actually prevent the action from happening. So make sure you know the difference between detection and prevention. There are two types. There are network-based and host-based. You will need to know the difference in these four types and when the best scenario or what the exam is asking for. So network-based intrusion detection is going to be looking at all network traffic and detecting suspicious activity. NIPS, and they may or may not have these spelled out or have the acronyms. So be sure you understand the difference. NIPS is going to be network-based intrusion prevention. So that is going to be watching all traffic on the network and preventing known malicious activity. And then HIDS and HIPS is host-based intrusion detection and host-based intrusion prevention. So it's only going to be looking at activity on a specific host and either detecting and alerting or preventing and alerting on that. Big point there when you're looking at this is because you want all your, let's just say your NIDS and NIPS is really what this is talking about. You really want that on a spot where all your traffic, it's going to get as much traffic as possible. So this could be between the DMZ and internal network, between a VPN terminator and the internal network, but you want as much traffic as possible going through that so that it can see you want it to see as much of the picture as possible. If you only have it on a specific segment, you may not see things. We'll talk a little bit more about false positives, false negatives, but this is called tuning. The solutions have gotten a lot better. They're still not ever going to be 100% plug and play. You'll still need to review and identify false positives and false negatives, but we'll talk about that more. Don't worry. I can sense everybody's excitement. Okay. Security information event management, or SIEM. What do we want to know? It's 4 things, okay? Centralization, normalization, correlation detection, and alerting. If you see those, that is how you know we're talking about a scene. So centralizing those log files, we want them in a central location. Instead of having to look at 100 servers, we have one place. Normalization. We know Linux and Windows logs are different. We know IIS and Apache logs are different. Well, what this does is allows normalization of different systems and different formats into a standardized format, because otherwise, I mean, it just is a absolute nightmare to try and look at 2 different things that have different fields without any sort of standardization and manually do that. Correlation detection, again, looking at multiple systems, and then what that does is it allows for I see activity A, B, and C here, and here. Well, now I can understand the scope of it, or maybe I see A, B here and C, D here, but those 2 things are now linked because of, for whatever reason. And then it would alert on those detections at that point. Really be careful and know these 4 things. I know, realize correlation detection kind of 2 things, but it is considered a single step. Really important. Garbage in, garbage out. SIM is only going to be as good as the information put into it. They operate on rules. You got to have those rules set properly. If you don't get all the data, you're not going to get it. If you don't, if you have it set so that only some level of your information is there, you're not going to get correlation and detection. So be aware of that. All right. So now looking at information security continuous monitoring, ISCM, and you'll need to know all the different acronyms, and there are so many of them. NIST has a good standard on that, and you're not going to need to know the NIST specifics, but you will need to know this level of it. So what is ISCM? Well, there are 6 steps you'll need to know to have this, okay? ISCM, and you might see a test question that states, what are the steps to establish, implement, and maintain an ISCM? And they'll have the 6 here that you see. We've defined a strategy. So we've got that defined and documented. We've established the program. We've implemented the program. We analyze the data and report findings, respond to findings, and review and update. Well, they may change some of that. Maybe they take out specific language, but you'll need to know, you don't need to know what is the definition of an ISCM strategy. You don't need to know that level. What you need to know is to have an ISCM, you want to define it, establish, implement, analyze the data and report findings, respond to the findings, and review and update. So really, from compliance, that's the whole point of this, is compliance to data driven. And that's a big difference when you're looking at risk management. All right, so again, continuous diagnostic and mitigation, kind of in line with that. Don't think you'll see that necessarily on the exam, but if you, again, it's in line with what we're talking about. If you want to read up on it, absolutely can. Okay, so logging and monitoring activities, egress monitoring, outbound, egress, firewalls. A lot of times we see it's only for inbound. Ingress is inbound, egress is outbound. You get no ingress, egress. If you're in tech, that's probably pretty straightforward. If you're not a technical person, you're going to need to know these things. We want to know what is going out of our network as well as what's coming in. So why? Data exfiltration and command and control traffic. DLP, very important, right? Built on the premises of egress traffic filtering. data loss prevention. I want to know and block social security numbers, credit card numbers, account information, medical codes, bank account information, all those types of things. Well, if you don't have egress traffic filtering in place, then you're not going to be able to capture those things. DLP, like it says there, can specific data patterns, right? The 3, 2, 4, which would be social security, credit card informations, all that stuff. But again, you want to make sure you understand egress traffic filtering. What are the benefits of that? Data exfiltration, C2C, command and control, and then the data loss prevention is built on egress traffic. We need to know log management and the strategy behind it. This is important. These bullet points really are the important part here. Log management. Why are we logging it? What should we be logging? Where we should be logging it? And what triggers, alerts, and responses in place? So understanding the strategy behind your log management. This is that SIM log aggregator. There's a ton of different standards out there. The exam is not going to ask you for any of the specifics. It's going to say, why is log management, why is strategy critical? We need to know these things. We need to know that the settings are continually tuned. We need to know what are auditable events and thresholds. So you have to define what should be logged. Again, just some examples here of system logins, file data access. We want successful and unsuccessful attempts. We don't want to just know unsuccessful, right? Maybe that's going to show brute force or password spreading, things like that. But I also want to know successful, so that if something happens, I can go back and see who logged in from where. Absolutely want changes to user permissions. So we want access attempts, changes to permissions, like sudo for Linux, or escalation to admin in Windows, user account, user account rights, right? Now, if your endpoint protection is disabled or changed, or there's setting changes to it, we want to know those things. We want to copy or export of sensitive files, so it goes to data classification, and then sensitive data transactions performed in application. So kind of understanding when we're looking at logging, what do we want to get? We want to know access attempts, changes to permissions, changes to settings and tools, if people are accessing those sensitive files, and then within the application, if there is sensitive data being manipulated or accessed. All right, so within that data, what do we need? Well, we need user or process ID. So who did it? It's our accountability. The timestamp, and UTC, universal time, which is the 0, or a standardized time by the whole organization, because what we don't want is to have to be trying to, in the event of an incident, going back and trying to see and look at different time zones and having to constantly go, okay, wait, so this was central, this device was Eastern, now I got to go and look at different times based on that. So we want a standardized format within the organization. Your device identifier, so whatever, it would, for the device identifiers, if they were to ask to the level you see here, it would say, it would give something in the question that identified, a network traffic. Well, that could be a host name or IP, or on local storage. That could be file name or function. So they give you enough information to know what type of device identifier they're looking for, or that it is device identifier is the answer to the question. And then your policy identifiers. So again, knowing what triggered the event. So was it a failed login? So in this case, if you see the event showed failed logins, that's a policy identifier, not a device identifier. So again, we don't need to know the format of the user IDs or process IDs. You don't need to know, a ton about, you need to be familiar with device identifiers, understanding that this could be host name, IP address, or the name of an object that was accessed. So, a file name or a function. So you just need to know how to identify a device identifier or a policy identifier. And a policy identifier is the thing that triggered the event. Device identifier could be what accessed it or what was accessed. And then really the ideal situation, best practice is log data should be separate with a separate login than what is used to manage and maintain the rest of the organization. Typically, we want, say, a standalone solution that uses separate authentication mechanisms. So that if an attacker were to get in and get domain admin, they still can't go back and wipe logs. All right. Threat intelligence. Hey, let's use Wikipedia. I got a good one. So you guys are probably tired of hearing me read stuff, but right, we want to know, this is the information concerning occurrence and assessment, cyber and physical threats and threat actors, and then what those sources could include, where those are from. Okay, so understand what is threat intelligence. It is information about cyber and physical threats and threat actors, and that the sources could include open source, social media, human, technical intelligence. So I don't think they're going to test you on the specific, well, they won't test you on the Wikipedia definition. You're just going to need to know and understand the definition. If they have this type of language in there, that they're looking for threat intelligence versus incident response, right? So it's information about physical cyber threats and threat actors. Well, that could be cyber threat. That wouldn't be incident response. All right. Threat feeds. Understand and know what a threat feed is. So it's that first one, right? Information about threats learned from various sources. Period. Yeah, according to industry, physical region, etc. That can be further, but really you want to know it's information about threats learned from various sources. What are you going to use it for? Well, it could be threat hunting, or it could be in integration into other tools. So data loss prevention, the SIM or SOAR, which is we'll go through as well. There are commercial and free versions. You don't really need to know specifically but just know there are commercial and free versions. And then, so one thing you will want to know is industry specific groups. So Information Security and Analysis Center, so ISACs, do share based on that industry. So there's healthcare, there's, in this case, this is the, you can see American Chemistry Council, automotive. There's so many different ISACs. Just know that if you see ISAC, it is industry or information sharing and analysis center for industry specific. Those are good reference points too. If you are in a specific industry, you can go join the ISAC for that and get some really good information and sharing on what others in the industry are seeing. Okay, so now we need to know what is threat hunting. So we looked at threat feeds. Now, what is threat hunting? Well, in reality, what is it? We're looking for. We don't have evidence of an incident. We don't have evidence of malicious activity, but we want to go and look and see if there is anything. So we're seeking threat actors in an environment based on known and unknown threats. What does that mean? You're going to deploy typically tools. You're going to look at logs, and you're going to be looking for indicators of compromise. Typically, you can do this internally. You can hire a company to come in and do a threat hunt. It could be that you know, maybe you don't have evidence of something happening, but that others in your industry are seeing something. So you want to make sure that there's nothing going on. So threat hunting, we're seeking threats or threat actors in an environment based upon known and unknown threats. There's no evidence of there being an incident at that point. If there was incident, I mean, a threat hunt, to be completely realistic, is very, very similar to an incident response, and the tools and approaches are very similar. The difference is we don't have anything specific that we're looking for. We're looking to see if we can find anything. Okay, understanding the difference between dark web and deep web. Dark web is, big one here is the use of special access methods like the Tor network. Deep web is accessible over the internet, but not publicly exposed. Things, banking information, private social media, and content behind paywalls. So deep web is accessible, but not publicly exposed. Dark web is special access method. You don't need to really know a whole lot more than that. They may ask you about the Tor network, but it would use the, more likely than not would have something along the lines of special access methods. Okay, so login monitoring. Now we're looking at user and entity behavior analytics. So what this is going to do is look for outliers in user behavior. So suddenly maybe maybe a lot of DNS traffic from a device to a DNS server outside of the organization. That is one of the ways that attackers will get their payloads delivered is they'll get compromise the device and then have it send DNS to actually download that payload for the persistence. So, or maybe there could be anything, but really what you're looking for was we need to know what our baseline activity is so that we can identify the abnormalities. That's really all you need to know. So user entity behavior analytics know both the full spelled out and the acronym there, and that it's going to be, again, machine learning, deep learning, but it's modeling the behavior so we know normal and can find evil. So UEBA highlighting anomalous behavior that could be a sign of a cyber attack. All right. Whew. Everybody, hopefully not lost everybody yet. This is, again, pretty good. I like this domain, so it is really relevant to a lot of what we do day to day. So, all right, configuration management. So now we're off of investigations, and now we're looking at configuration management, or CM. So what is it? It's secure configuration, making only authorized secure changes, and then maintaining the asset in a secure state. You'll need to know that items under configuration management are configuration items. I don't know why, like it says at the bottom, CI is better than asset. I mean, configuration items are assets, let's be honest, as it states there, right? So you'll need to know a configuration item is a system, an endpoint, an application, those types of things. And I guess maybe the difference is you could have data as an asset and this configuration item isn't. So anything that is managed by your configuration management is going to be configuration item. Your secure configuration of that is called a baseline. And then changes to the baseline must follow a formal change management process. So what is configuration management? It's the secure configuration making only authorized and secure changes, and then maintaining in a secure state. It is made up of items called configuration items, and changes to those items follow a formal change management process. If you're doing this, it's pretty native. If you're not, you do need to learn this because this is pretty common in a lot of organizations. It is good for that. Now, let's just throw that curve wrench in there. What is, could be meaning both configuration and change management. So this is a really good slide to read and understand the difference. Like it says, configuration is dealing with the identifying and maintaining of the known good state of CIs. Change management is dealing with the request, approval, and implementation of changes to CIs. So that's really the important part here is being able to tell from the question the difference between configuration management and change management. Configuration is the known good state. Change management is changes to the CI. We want to identify and maintain the state of the CI, or we're going to change the state of the CI. Those are that's your go-tos on that. All right. So configuration management, you need to have a configuration management plan. We need to have provisioning of that. So how do we set up and deploy a new CI? You must have your CI entered in an asset inventory, which again, CI is basically asset, but that is what we need to know. And then you need to have your baseline, whatever that could be. Again, it could be a DISA, the STIG, it could be a CIS benchmark, whatever it is. You just have to have your baseline configuration documented and defined somewhere. So when we provision, those two steps is the CI is entered into your asset inventory and the baseline configuration is applied to it. Here's what the STIGs look like. You can go out and grab those if you want. I personally really like the CIS benchmarks. They do a good job. But Microsoft has some good ones as well, especially for their 365 stuff. So from a baseline perspective, lots of good resources out there. There's no reason not to, other than it's work. All right. Yeah, insecure configurations, very common. We want to automate those and maintain them through change management. Baseline configurations could be as simple as disabling DHCP client on your servers and disabling DNS or only restricting it to certain to your internal DNS queries, or so looking through, go through, find what your environment has, look at Windows or CIS or the STIGs, and you're going to find really good easy to implement things that you can do. You don't need those to know those for the exam itself. You just need to know you need a secure configuration baseline applied to your CIs as part of provisioning. All right, applying. Oops, got some bullet points on there that didn't need to be there. Foundational security. So you've got to know these. These have got to be second nature to you. Need to know these privilege are, like I said, they are different. These are not, they are used interchangeably, but not necessarily should be. No, need to know is data driven. Okay, so does a person or subject, what is a subject? That could be a device, it could be an application, it could be a service. We'll get all those things hammered and nailed down for you, but don't worry. So just say, does what is trying to access that information need to know that information? It's regardless of if they have privileges to that. Do I need to know that? I might have privileges to all of the HR data, do I need to know other departments' HR information, or do I need to know only my teams? I only need to know my teams. So need to know data driven. Least privilege. Do you need this level of access to perform an authorized job function? Okay. You might see it minimum necessary access, but so how do we tell these apart? Again, I'm going to hammer it home one more time. Need to know data driven, least privilege, system driven. Need to know, does the person need to know that information? Least privilege, does the person need that level to perform an authorized job function? Understand the difference in those two. And very similar, very different. All right, separation of duties and responsibilities. Again, you'll want to know where it says there that it's limiting the potential for misuse of resources or malicious activities, separating process steps upon multiple people. So that's what this means. What does that actually look like? Dual control meaning two or more persons. Typically, I don't know if I've seen it other than persons, but the official is entities, but I would just think of it as persons. Two or more persons operating in concert to protect sensitive information functions. So think two keys, right? Like, we both are, we're going to turn our keys on a count of three. You see that in the movies. Or dual control could be changes in financial payment information. Two people have to operate together to make a change to protect the sensitive information. Again, two-person integrity requires no one person can access an asset without another authorized individual present. So again, I can't do something without another person there doing something. So we have to have two people that are authorized to access it. Dual control is operating in concert. Two-person integrity, meaning two people that have authorization are there. So here is what that actually defines it as. In this case, two-person controls handling nuclear command and control, whereas two-person integrity refers only to the handling of keying material. So two-person integrity, going back, if you have the key information, it requires two people that are authorized to see that key information. To actually do anything with it requires dual control. Okay, privileged account management, or PAM. Any privileged accounts, so any elevated privileges require additional protections, additional processes in place. So we want to, anytime there's provisioning, anytime there's use, there's review or deprovisioning of a privileged account, it should have additional steps during that access management, different steps of the access management life cycle. We need to say, if it's a privileged account, it's reviewed quarterly to determine if it's required. There's got to be MFA enabled on it. It can only be used to log into these locations, whatever it might be. But what this privileged account management is that we are taking additional protections for any account with elevated privileges. Now, you'll need to know what is elevated privilege. You'll need to know that it'll typically tell you, that it was an administrator account or an elevated account, and it may say, well, what does that mean? We need to have additional rigor during the access management lifecycle, or that we need to have documentation around provisioning, use, review, and deprovisioning of any privileged account. That is what privileged account management is. Ooh, job rotation. Where are we at? Hour 20. Okay, good pace. So now we need to know what job rotation is. And this is going to be where there's benefits to this. So you need to understand that it's cross training. So it improves operational resilience. So what security operations concept improves operational resilience, job rotation. Then the other is that it limits or mitigates internal fraud. So what does this mean? Every month or every week, you have different people doing those jobs. Well, if I'm doing the books for a company, or I do all the payroll, or I do all the checks, and I know that each month it's going to change, and there's a 3-month rotation, there's 3 of us doing it. Well, the incentive to engage in fraud is far lower, knowing that other people will be looking at it. And then if there is fraud, it's more likely to be detected. So understand what job rotation is, that it improves operational resilience, but through cross training, and limits or mitigates internal fraud. You'll need to know service level agreements, SLAs. Define, this is what you need to know. Defines the level of service expected from a third party. Okay, and what does that mean? Well, the metrics by what is measured, and remedies and penalties if those service levels are not achieved. So we, internet 99.99% uptime. Cloud services. What is that? If it's a locally hosted, or if it's in a data center, if it's an MSP, we need to know what our service is of that third party. How are they measuring that? And then what is our remedy, or what is the penalty to them if that's not met or maintained? So it's pretty standard in any technical or technology vendor contract at this point. What you want to know is service level requirements, SLR, is code, like the SLRs are that define what those the SLRs define those things, and those are included in the SLA. So the SLA is your formal document where you've signed off and say, here's all the things that are included. And you should also be watching those things to understand, is your vendor actually meeting the approved the SLRs? Are they in compliance with their SLA? Okay. So now looking at resource protection, media. So when we look at media, it says physical and electronic. We need to know that when you see media, it doesn't just mean USB drives, DVDs. It is any physical or electronic. So paper, hard drives, USB drives, whatever, anything that could have data on it is considered, it needs to come into your media management program. Best practice, and this is one where people struggle. All data should be classified as part of this. It's hard to go back. We get asked all the time on that. We can talk about that another time, but really what you need to know is that all data should be classified as part of your data management practice for the exam. And then you need to label and mark your data based on data classification requirements. And that must be done using the highest classification on the media. So you need to know what data you have where, so that it can be classified and labeled and marked properly. If you want to look at more on that, you can absolutely go grab this from our website, and it has all that information kind of spelled out for you. And here you can see, right, it's labels of internal use only. Okay. Handling the data. So now that you've labeled and marked your data, it communicates to whoever has that data what the protection requirement is. What does that mean? Okay, let me go to I need to know if I have internal data, I must follow these 4 bullet points, right? It has to be stored, protected by confidentiality agreement. It has to be stored in a closed container. Must be protected to prevent loss, threat, whatever. If it's confidential, it must be encrypted, right? So when we look at information handling, it's really critical to train employees to know that. But what do you don't need to know for the exam how to protect this information, because every organization gets to define that and do that separately. But what you need to know is when you see handling, it is based on that the labeling and marking communicates to the person holding that information, whoever has that, what the requirements are. So that's what you need to know. So what, I don't know why that rock came in there. That's so when you're looking at media protection, if they have physical compromise, you have to assume full, complete, total compromise. That's just, that is what it is. But you need to know transporting your media. How are you transporting it? How are you protecting it? So we're going to encrypt it. We're going to hash it so that when it gets to wherever it's at, or we get it back, we can compare those hashes and make sure that it hasn't changed. And those physical protections, if we say that it's got confidential information and must be under lock and key, well, then we need to keep it under lock and key. Again, physical also has to include environmental controls. Is it, is humidity going to be an issue? Do we need to keep it in a conditioned spot, or can it be in an unconditioned spot? When we're looking at how do we sanitize and dispose of this, full disk encryption is currently considered a mitigating control. That is you have to be able to prove that your device was fully encrypted by a sufficient encryption algorithm. And that will cover you in the event of compromise. But that you really should, when you're disposing of any hard drive or anything that, whether it's from a USB drive, a hard drive from a workstation, server, multifunction machine, you really should be wiping that once. I mean, you can go more, people say more, but we'll talk about that. I don't think outside of the controlled lab environment, I've seen a single overwrite not be sufficient, especially if you're going to be physically destroying that data and there is chain of custody between them. All right. So now incident management, and it's interesting the order they put these in, that we talk a little bit about digital forensics and then we talk about incident management, but okay. Event, know the difference. An event is something that happened. An incident is an event with a negative consequence. So every incident is an event. Not every event is an incident. There you go. Know the difference. Your incident management plan, this is going to be all the information you need. So this is your contact information, how you're classifying information. There's a metric ton of stuff out there. Security Studio, FRSecure both have templates out there. FRSecure, you can see here, we talked about the playbooks and everything, all totally open, not gated. Feel free to go grab those, read through them. Really helpful. There's just kind of what the Security Studio one looks like. Versioning, explaining the version history requirements. Looking at what, again, are you going to need to know to this level? No, you want to be able to say, an incident response plan is going to define the incident, define roles and responsibilities, define the IR processes. And again, you don't necessarily need to know and say high severity incident. You just need to know it's going to define those response processes, and then contain, the definitions and types. Let's see, here's all our different forms. It's all this stuff that you need to be able to properly manage an incident. Here's again just a sample of what the incident response form looks like. Again, we talked about it, but chain of custody. How do we categorize this? And this is available out on our website if you really want to go get it. Classifies. How do we notify it? And so this is really what you want to know and understand to be successful in an incident response plan is all these things. From a test perspective, I'm going to go back here. From a test perspective, what you need to know is an incident management is going to contain how the organization will manage an incident from beginning to the end. Okay. If you want to be a little bit more in depth and go there and understand it, absolutely read through this and know, it's going to contain roles, responsibilities. These can be changed. They're not going to test on roles and responsibilities typically because these are up to the organization to define that. It's up to the organization to define how they report an incident, how they do each of these steps. So what they're really looking for is the high level, what should be included in an incident. And then these are just additional kind of tools and tips and things for better helping you understand in a day-to-day situation how these things work. All right. Part of incident management, you have to do testing. It is mandatory. It needs to be done at least annually. These are training opportunities, right? We want to test the muscle memory. These are typically considered to be no-fault exercises. It does improve your response because the more you go through it, the better off you're going to be. The more familiar your team will be with it. So really important to go through these. It can be used to integrate with other plans. So business continuity and disaster recovery. We'll get through all of these, but typically incident response is going to come first. Once you've contained an incident, then you're going to transition to disaster recovery, right? You're going to recover any systems that were compromised. Recovery is part of the incident response steps, but just important to note what testing and exercise, mandatory, training, improves response, could be integrated with other plans. Reporting, really, really important here. There are two messages. We have an internal message and an external message. Okay. Why is that important? Well, internally, there's going to be more need to know than external. External should be is only need to know. We're only going to tell people what they need to know. Internally, there may be a greater need to know. So we want to make sure that is known. Also, as you can see here, internal communications handled by CIO or chief legal. What does that look like? So again, you don't need to know what internal communications include. You just need to know the concept behind it. It's going to be more information typically and to a different audience. Okay, so external communications, public relations or legal officer. Here's who can talk about it. Here's what information, right? So just, again, they're not going to test you on the difference between internal and external, but you need to be able to differentiate and understand the difference. All right. Looking at operating, maintaining, detective, and preventative measures. Defense in depth. So these are things where it's going to be both preventative and detective. And what are we looking at here? You can see we've got multiple layers. You've got a DMZ, web proxy. So just understand defense in depth is going to be layered controls, both preventative and detective functions. They're not going to test you on, the specifics of any of this stuff, other than that you're going to need to know, potentially if they list perimeter firewall, host IDS, web application firewalls, right? So you'll want to know and understand what does defense in depth look like, multiple layers, right? Multiple layers, detective and preventative controls. So read questions and look for and be able to understand and say, okay, we've got detective monitoring over here with the SOC. We've got preventative with, these other things. You're not going to need to memorize per se this, but just to understand the concept behind it is really, really the important part. If you're really into it, go through the NSA methodology for adversary obstruction. If you're, it's I think an interesting read, but up to you. All right. In these, we talked, actually, I think this was a missed order. I think we have not gotten through the full 4 yet, so this will be just understanding this. We're going to go through this a lot more in depth. Evan will be going through this. I forgot that we had switched the order. So these will be coming up. This is a good point. If you are not technically strong, this is going to be a big part coming up here. So be very aware of that. You're going to need to know the difference between static, stateful, web application firewalls, host-based firewalls, next-gen firewalls, and then security groups. So kind of a review here. You get a little sneak preview because I completely forgot we switched the order of this year. So you're welcome. Again, knowing the difference between IDS and IPS, what are their similarities? IDS is detecting and monitoring. IDS can accept whether it's, it's going to take action. So automated versus manual intervention. Allow listing, block listing. This used to be a white and black. I'll be honest, I looked and I could not find a good table and ran out of time to fix this. So apologies. This should be block listing and allow listing. This is what you need to know about it. Really, that's all they changed. White allow listing is it's only allowing what is explicitly listed. Block listing is blocking. It's only going to block what is listed as blocked. So that can be quickly out of date, can be intensive. So just know this table. Allow listing allows only the approved traffic is allowed. Block listing is all traffic, but what is explicitly blocked is allowed. All right, looking at third-party provided services, knowing the difference with some of these, what are the pros and cons? This could be a security operations center. What is the point of this? Well, maybe you don't need a full SOC, or you're a small enough organization, you can't justify it. We're going to outsource that. A defer firm. Well, now we're going to look at, again, maybe our organization can't justify having specialists for digital forensics on staff, so we're going to contract with a company that does. And threat intelligence, again, what is the benefit if we're going to do open source or paid? But just to understand again, the concept behind what is a third party provided service. All right. We will want to know the difference in sandboxing and then honeypots and honey nets. So sandboxing is I talked about it a little bit before with the virtual machine. You're going to run code or observe and analyze code in a safe, isolated environment that mimics in-user operated environments. So maybe we have suspicious or potentially malicious file. Well, we don't want to run that on my day-to-day machine, right? I want to run that on a virtual machine that is locked down, can't get network access, can't get access to anything else. What is it for? It's again designed to prevent threats from getting on the network. So sandboxing is if we want to run code or analyze code in a safe, isolated environment. Honeypots and honey-nets are devices attached to a network that act as a decoy. So you want to typically you see this as where they are studying hacking attempts to see what's going on. I strongly recommend against honeypots and honey-nets because you do have potential for entrapment and enticement. And you put a compromisable system out there and somebody says, well, I wasn't going to do it, but you made it available. And so there's some legal gray areas around there. So unless you're running it as a research type of thing, I would strongly recommend against it. All right, we need to implement and support patch and vulnerability management. So just some fun facts here. And we'll talk about it in SDLC. A little bit crazy when you look at some of these notes. The fact that 75% is debugging is crazy. All right. Based on that, 50 million lines of code, 75,000 bugs. Yeah, that's a little bit nuts to think about. A little scary that average car has 150 million lines of code. So we'll talk about SDLC, but what you need to know is again the definitions you see on this page, know the difference, right? So patch management incorporates all of the following: vulnerability detection, so we're going to be scanning; patch publication, so that's where the vendor is going to have to patch it, right? They have to, or the dev team, if you're doing internal development. There needs to be evaluation, so we need to look at that patch and understand what does the patch do? Is it needed? We need to test the patch in a test environment or in a subset of users in production if test is not realistic. We then need to apply and track the test or the patching. I can tell you from personal experience, this is super critical. We rolled out an Internet Explorer patch that broke a web application completely. And we had held off, and the patch was like 2 months old. We're like, okay, now it's exploitable. We don't have a choice. And it completely broke a web app. Well, it's a lot easier to go back and say, okay, what changed? And now we can go back and fix that much quicker, which leads to rollback. So if an issue is encountered, how are we going to correct it? And then the documentation of systems, including the patch, which becomes part of the asset inventory and change management. So typically, a lot of this would be handled with a patch management solution. So typically, you want to scan with something different than what you're using for patch management. But the publication evaluation, well, a commercial patch management is going to automate your collection of the patches as they're published. But you need to then be able to evaluate them within that tool, have a test group. It'll then help you with the applying and tracking, the rollback, and the documentation. And with that, we're done. All right. So what are we at now? Catch up in any reading, take some practice tests, look at the Discord, chat. We're good. We're good. Ryan, I don't know if there were any questions or anything. We did finish a couple minutes early here. So if there are no questions, then with that, I think we can stop this a little bit early and ease you guys into this a little bit more. So thank you everybody for attending, and hopefully this was helpful, and we will see you on Wednesday.